What's up, ladies and gentlemen of the internet? It's your boy, Jack Slack, coming at you with Fights Gone By episode 80 on a lovely Tuesday afternoon. Spring/summer seems to finally be arriving in the UK. Beautiful sun everywhere. So I'm enjoying an icy beverage rather than the usual hot tea, though I will not feel the benefit, I'm sure. And let's talk about UFC 224 and Bellator 199 and everything that happened, including Mackenzie Dern, which is the one that everyone wants to talk about at the moment. But first, let's kick it off with some news. So the real earth-shattering news this week was that Tito Ortiz announced that the Chuck 3 fight is definitely going to happen. And then Chuck also came out and said that he is back and he wants to promote that Tito bout with Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya's promotion, and that Tito is not an irreplaceable part in it. He would happily come back against anyone, said that he'd happily fight John Jones. Everyone else just sort of nodded and listened to this 48-year-old CTE-damaged, coke-addled man try and pitch himself as a great fighter once again. Oh, God. Someone pointed this out to me on Twitter. The fact that Scott Coker won't even promote this tells you something about it. But then, the only way they got Chuck out of the sport in the first place was to offer him a six-figure salary to do nothing. And once the new owners came in and said, why are we paying this guy and Matt Hughes 6 figures to do nothing? Obviously couldn't last forever. Elsewhere, PFL, or World Series of Fraud, as it used to be, announced Jake Shields versus Ray Cooper 3 for a title fight. If you were confused and thinking, when did he fight Ray Cooper the first 2 times? It's because Ray Cooper the third is who he's fighting. Really not important news aside from the fact that, Jesus Christ, why is Jake Shields having to fight these people? Ray Cooper just lost his last fight and has never fought in PFL or World Series of Fighting. Yeah, it just made me laugh, that headline, because everyone was like, what the fuck? Did he fight him twice already? And if he had, it would have been 2 losses, so why are you giving him a third fight? And then finally elsewhere, as a result of this weekend's action, Kelvin Gastelum says he's going to be sitting out and waiting for a title shot. Yeah, I mean, this is what guys are going to do now. I would love to see Gastelum versus either Ramiro or Whittaker, regardless of which one wins, to be honest. But, we'll talk about stylistic matchups in a minute when we talk about the Jacare fight. But I think this is another one of those things like Nate Diaz sitting out, Ryan Hall's doing the same thing, Yair Rodriguez, we didn't even touch on that. Yair got cut earlier in the week, allegedly for not wanting to fight Zabit, or for wanting better terms, or for wanting a tune-up fight. All very understandable from a manager's point of view, especially as Yair was coming off that horrendous beating against Frankie Edgar when they gave him too much too soon. I feel like this is another one of those problems that could be solved by having actual rankings that are decided by, some kind of metric or some kind of algorithm, computers, or just people who know what the fuck they're talking about and are paid to do it full time. At the moment, you have a real ranking system that only ranks 15 people per division, and doesn't matter until you go to New York and someone drops out of a fight, and is only ranked by, due to vote every other week. If you had an actual ranking system that actually ranked everyone in a division based on, and assigned them each a score or whatever Fight Matrix does or something like that, you could actually have people fighting someone they felt like would move them forwards. But at any rate, really, Yair being cut so quickly, or just so readily for something so unimportant in the grand scheme of things, really just suggests that MMA fighters should get to work forming their union or association or whatever it is. Obviously, Leslie Smith was paid off to leave without taking her last fight just recently and is trying to sue the UFC. The unionization effort really needs to ramp up soon because there's so much money in the UFC and the fighters are not making a lot of it, and they can be cut on a whim, and they have to wear uniform. So they're not really independent contractors, except they are. But then these are just repeating, this is repeating tired arguments now. Fighters are the absolute worst sort of people to take this idea to because, well, as they always say about the American public, everyone is just a temporarily destitute millionaire, someone in a moment of embarrassment, but they will be rich again soon. But fighters are like that, but anyone in any sporting pursuit is going to be the kind of person who's so driven that they believe they can be the best, and they don't have to worry about general pay for everyone because they're going to be. Well, I get emails every week from someone saying he's going to be the next Demetrius Johnson or Conor McGregor. Yeah, so that level of delusion doesn't really go together with a collective bargaining mindset. Though, consider the egos of so many NFL and NBA players, and I think Major League Baseball has a union too, or a players' association. But yeah, compare it to that, and it would take a real dummy not to realise that you probably need to do something about that soon. Collective bargaining. I think one of the really telling things about this entire situation, the unionization of fighters or a fighters association or whatever, is that a lot of the people who follow this, the sport appeals to something very primal in people, but it also has a very technical edge. So it appeals to a very wide spectrum of people with very wide spectrum of political beliefs. But overwhelmingly, I notice people on my Facebook just, in their random rant posts that come up on your newsfeed, just saying, I don't support unions generally, blah, 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 but fighters need to unionize. So when people who are generally against unionization realize how badly you're being fucked over, it's pretty obvious to everyone. But anyway, enough about that. We'll get another chance to talk about that in future, I'm sure, because they're never going to unionize or associate or whatever. So let's talk about UFC 224. Not a bad card in terms of action, lots of finishes. An enjoyable one just to sort of sit down and watch. I can't imagine how bad the pay-per-view buys are going to be on this one, but there were some good fights on it. I'll just go through what sort of stood out to me. I'm not really doing the star ratings today. Jack Hermansson versus Thales Leites was the one that I said I was looking forward to before it. That turned out to be an incredible fight. I think Jacare versus Gastelum got a fight of the night, but I'd have given it to that. I think they gave Hermansson performance of the night too, but Thales Leites also did a great job in that fight. 2 rounds of Thales Leites just trying to get all over him and smother him, and Hermansson finally pulling through in the final round with a rib injury, and a really visible rib injury too. Well, we thought it was the knee when he went down, but it was on a takedown, and you saw him grimace. You're like, I've seen this so many times. I know that is a knee or a rib that's been blown out. But yeah, I love Jack Hermansson. His striking is bizarre. Like, I remember his first performance in the UFC being a lot more floaty and light, but here he was just really angry, it seemed like. And he was doing like a sidestep, the sort of Ali sidestep where you bounce a little bit and then you retract your lead foot and skip your right foot out to your side. It's a method for escaping to the side when you're cornered, when you don't have room to like circle out over space, or the opponent's right up on you. Of course, you're retracting that foot to create space and then stepping off to the side. But he was like kicking his right foot out. He was like, it looked like he was trying to hit the pads when he was doing this sidestep. He was very tense and very angry for most of the first round, it looked like. But yeah, Hermansson's wrestling looked slick against Leites, and there was a moment when Leites got him down in the first round up against the fence, and Hermansson had the underhook and stood back up, technical stand-up style, and he hit a hip throw like an ogoshi, and like bundled Thales Leites over to the floor. And if you were in anywhere but Brazil, that would have got a cheer, because Brazilian crowds are aggressively patriotic. How moody do you have to be to not applaud? He did several in this fight, like hip throws or uchimatas or things like that. How moody do you have to be to not applaud that? To just be like, I'm miserable. But that's the Brazilian crowd in a nutshell, really. Thales Leites looked good. On the bottom, he was doing some interesting stuff. He got he got trapped in sort of like 3/4 guard, which is basically one butterfly hook, broken butterfly. Rubbish position to play guard from. You really have to like either go to half guard, like kick your leg through, go to half guard, or try and get back to full guard. But he was using the grapevine on the free leg, and then he used the leg that was inside to elevate and get in on a half guard get up style sweep. Very cool. Really good fight. And then Hermansson turned it around while clearly dying of a rib injury and battered him from the top position and just put on one of those bursts. And Leites had been smothering the whole fight. The arm triangle was so tight. Like, it was ridiculous watching him outlast that. And Leites' top pressure in this was great. He was working the underhook all the time, using the head pin, using chest pressure, and all of that stuff sucks. Like, if you're tired, it's going to suck even more if you've got a busted up rib. So mad respect to Jack Hermansson. That definitely deserved performance of the night. I think it could have deserved fight of the night. IMHO. What else went on? Oh, spinning hook kick and punches, knockout on Sean Strickland. I was just watching Sean Strickland versus Usman today, because I'm preparing for that Maya Usman fight. Yeah. And then Davy Ramos got his submission. Olynyk is... I love this guy more and more every time I see him. His striking is dog shit, and Albini hit him with a counter left hook right off the bat. And because Olynyk comes from a land where there is no sun, he has the snowflake white rusky skin, and his skin just said, "Oh, no thanks," and burst open. So he was bleeding from like the opening 20 seconds. But yeah, he got Albini to the fence, and he tried like to wrap his head, and you were going, "Oh, is he actually going to try and Ezekiel him standing?" Because I joked about him doing that to Anthony Joshua in boxing gloves earlier in the week, or claimed that he would be able to. But he actually tried to do it standing against Albini, and Albini sort of got out. But then he came in again, got the arm around the head, dropped to his back, pulling half guard, and then snuck the Ezekiel in from there. And Albini, you could see him, like, from his actions, he was going, "I've got to tap. Oh, no, I can't, but, I do have to tap." He's so disappointed in himself for getting caught. But that's like his 11th Alexei Olynyk. The guy is just incredible. And he's got a couple of wins on his record by chest compressor, including future Bellator heavyweight tournament champion Mirko Krokop. And thank God they didn't let Albini roll his shorts up again. Cesar Ferreira, arm triangled Carl Robertson. What else? Belfort versus Machida. This was my big article this week. I used it to talk about a theme. Machida lands another front kick to the face victory. This is Machida's third front kick to the face victory. Rich Franklin, Randy Couture, Vitor Belfort. This is Vitor Belfort's second front kick to the face loss. So it's sort of a perfect storm there making it. But I wrote an article called Machida versus Belfort, why and when to front kick, or why and when to use the front snap kick. It's on Vice Sports. Go check it out. It'll be on the Fightland Facebook page, Twitter. It'll be on the Fight Primer, which I've tidied up this week and is much slicker and better updated. Cleaner, that's what it is. They cut to Faraz Zahabi in Vitor's corner, telling him what to do. It was the right thing to do. There's nothing more frustrating than watching a corner give correct advice and then the fighter not do it. But Vitor is just who he is. Like, he's been who he is for 5-10 years now. He bursts in, and then if he's not comfortable, he doesn't burst in. So the idea was to get in off Machida's kicks, because Machida throws long round kicks. Vitor could take them on the arms and just move in while he was on one leg, except Vitor would only do the burst when he felt like doing the burst. He wouldn't do it when Machida was on one leg. He'd just do it randomly later on. And of course, Vitor Belfort gets in the habit of just standing on the end of his opponent's kicking range and staring at them. So Machida just kicked him in the chin, exactly the same way Anderson Silva did, just hanging out on the end of his range. So he spoke about this in the article. The reason that the front snap kick knockout is so rare while guys are throwing more and more front snap kicks is that it requires a very special sort of opening from the... it's a very small range window you've got. The uppercut hinges at the elbow. Not hinges at the elbow, sorry. The uppercut you can shorten and lengthen by bending or straightening the elbow and then throwing it on a slightly different arc. The front snap kick is the kicking equivalent of the uppercut, when you're throwing it to the jaw at least, in that it comes up through the blind angle from underneath, but you can't shorten the kick, because the knee is not just a stabilizing part of it or an adjustable part of it. The knee has to go through its full range of motion, or near enough, to actually perform the kick. So you can hold your hip back, you can lean into it. There are a few ways to shorten and lengthen it, but it's not nearly as versatile as the uppercut. So really you've only got that very small window out on the end of your reach where you can hit them with it. And the reason it worked against Vitor Belfort is the same reason it worked against Alistair Overeem for Travis Brown. If you have your hands up in the classical kickboxing way, where you're I'm going to take all his round kicks on my forearms without actually having to deal with them and move straight in, you have that big gap up the centre. And especially if yours just sort of, one, you always readjust and get onto the end of their range, that's how you're pressuring, and two, if you're just sort of plodding after them, as Overeem was. And the reason that I wrote this article was, firstly, because it was an awesome knockout, so he's going to get your hits. But secondly, we talked about this with Agneev last week, I think it was. The exact same thing happened to him. He kept walking onto the end of his opponent's range, pressuring them close to the fence, but not throwing enough. So eventually his man, Yagshimuradov, guesswork, I'm not even looking at his name, Yagshi hits him with a front kick in the chin. And he starts swinging, and Yagshi spins him around and takes him down for the first time. and proceeds to his back and gets the rear naked choke. So very valuable kick, but really there's a specific situation where it works very, very well, and Vitor Belfort is that situation. John Lineker versus Brian Kelleher. I thought Lineker looked better than he has. His ring cutting is still not tip top. Brian Kelleher seemed to be doing his TJ Dillashaw impression, but yeah, he was just sort of like he was trying to dart around on the outside and use inside punches like the uppercut and left hook to do the damage. He went sort of to the jab later, but it wasn't a very good jab. But I thought his movement looked good and his choice of strike wasn't always the best. I would have said front kicks are the a number one enemy of John Lineker because he's so square and he comes straight in and they hit the body and they're long and you can even if he catches them you can double teep and push him off. But the one front kick that I saw Kelleher throw, Lineker actually parried and moved in behind. So I was like, wow, Lineker doing something new here. Would have gone low kicks, but Lineker was the one going with those and actually caught Kelleher with a cut kick underneath and then hit him while he was like floating through the air and knocked him down in the first round, which was pretty cool. But for guys like Lineker, you've got to treat hitting the head, because I don't think he's even been knocked down now, but you've got to treat hitting the head as an investment rather than trying to knock him out each time. So you've got to close up his eyes or catch him with an elbow as he steps in, which one is more powerful than a punch. An intercepting elbow is probably better than most of the punches you'll place. But two has a great chance of cutting him open, getting blood in his eyes. Because this happened with Dillashaw and Dodson. They ended up hitting him cleaner and actually like making him reconsider his actions and not just eat the punches when they'd swelled his eyes a little bit. And when they tired him out a bit by moving around lots. I think a 3-round fight is always going to be hard work against Lineker, though. 5-round fights, you've got a much better chance of drawing him out over the distance and tiring him a bit. But the left hook he chinned him with right at the end was gorgeous. Right hook to the body, left hook to the head, because it's John Lineker. But he caught him like circling the fence. Kelleher's guard the entire time, his elbows were flush to his body and his hands were just sort of next to his chin, which can work if you're in boxing gloves, but doesn't work if you're in MMA gloves, typically. Just guarding generally would be like number one thing to avoid. It's the lowest possible form of defense. Anyway, let's move on. Mackenzie Dern versus Amanda Cooper. Everyone hates Mackenzie Dern now. Really, I was quite impressed. She has clearly been reading her like strategy texts. Sun Tzu famously said, of course, that to know oneself and one's opponent is not the highest level of fighting. The highest level of fighting is, of course, to eat all the pies and then turn up 8 pounds overweight like a fucking amateur. What a bint. Just like, why would you do this? The worst part was that on the embedded, she arrived in whatever town it is, the week of the fight, and said, right, now to begin the weight cut. And then she left, apparently being 139 pounds. So, like, she had no intention of cutting to the actual weight, because 139 pounds to 115 pounds is not doable in water weight. So, like, what was the fucking point? And the best part was she got off the scale and went straight to the snack table. Not even a breath, just walked straight over. And it even in the little Twitter videos when they cut, you saw it. Oh, just so fucking bad. She was on a card with John Lineker and Kelvin Gastelum, and she came out looking the least professional. Unless Kelvin Gastelum gets caught for smoking his wacky backy again, which is always a possibility. But yeah, just what a shitlord. And the thing is, like, people... There was this thing that was like, yeah, well, she wants to look like a woman. She thinks a woman should have curves, blah, blah, blah. If you watch her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu career, when she was setting the world on fire in women's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, she always had an arse and curves, but she was pretty ripped. Like, she was actually competing at the appropriate weight class and in great shape. Here she just looked like if she wasn't like a terrific jiu-jitsu player, you'd think she was one of those soccer mums that they get in for the XF, whatever it was, that league where they just got people from the crowd to fight local fighters from local gyms to pad up their record. Explode Fighting Championship, that's the one. Striking in this was hideous from both of them, to be honest. Mackenzie Dern then wings a right hand over the top that lands but sends her off balance. The transition was nice. She went from knee cut, turned the knee out and jumped into mount at the same time. That was glorious. But yeah, people don't care if you come in 8 pounds overweight. And the weird thing is, like, she's sort of a hit, but I can't see her being that much of a hit. I can't see her being that much of a hit that they'd continue to let her fight at this weight class that she clearly doesn't want to compete at. And you really got to suspect her work ethic anyway, when the MMA lab, which is a world-class gym, produced guys like Benson Henderson and that lot. It's John Crouch down there, isn't it? Yeah, but they asked her to leave. They were like, please, just, if you're not going to train enough, don't come. I think that's very telling. But anyway, co-main event was a great fight between Jacare and Kelvin Gastelum. Gastelum got taken down early, fought off mount for a long time, and he was doing it in a very interesting way, hands on the biceps, like Anderson Silva versus Travis Lutter, where we're all going, oh, the arm bar's right there, but he's actually just protecting himself from the punches. Used his classic wrestling, building up, getting up. Yeah, second round, third round were better for Gastelum. Lots of people thought Jacare landed the better shots, but Jacare was just knackered for the entire second and third round, and that's Gastelum's real strength. He is, it's the same as Bobby Whittaker. Lots of these middleweights are getting by on being explosive and dominating. Like Jacare and Romero are the best example of this. And Rockhold to a degree, just overwhelming people. And they've got a lot of technical flaws, and these can really be drawn out by driving the pace on them. Yoel Romero is the guy who takes breaks. That's what he does. And Jacare is just as guilty of it. And they're both 40 years old, and it really shows if you get in their face and you just keep them working. Even if they're hitting you, even if they're taking you down, they like to do it at their own pace. I think in a 5-round fight, Gastelum could have probably pulled ahead in the fourth and fifth with the state of Jacare by the end of the third. But yeah, controversial decision for some. This is why it really annoys me. Every time there's a controversial decision between two really high level guys in like a co-main event, I have to say, at a certain level, these guys should just be fighting 5 rounds. When you've got two top 10 talents in the world, 5 rounds would be a really good decision, I think. And again, could be fixed with the ranking system or a proper ranking system. Finally, main event, Amanda Nunes, Raquel Pennington, went about as expected. I will say, Pennington's counters looked very good in the first round. The problem was that she immediately stood on the fence, got her leg kicked to shit, and then had no room to move. And I don't think she really came off the fence at all after that. If you are a counter fighter, you want as many directions of movement open as possible, because you're using your head to slip to the side and change level. You want to be able to change level, you want to be moving side to side, you want to be able to move your head side to side, and you want to be able to move forward and back. You want all those options open to you. The less you have open to you, the more predictable your response is going to be. And especially when she was just stood there on the fence getting kicked. The other thing about countering, like if you watched her first round counters, which were quite nice, because Amanda Nunes does throw that like Renan Barão style Brazilian Muay Thai punching, which is where your elbows come way out to the side like you're rowing a kayak. It's not great form. I mean, she's a good hitter, but she's not got good technical boxing. And it does leave you open for counters, especially if you rely on a heavy right hand as much as she does and don't come back to close the door with the left hand as quickly as you should. So Pennington was catching her with a couple of like slip and counters. Problem is, of course, that not only was she taking, the fence took away half her movement, but anytime you're using head movement or level changes, your legs are like the most important part of that. Boxing generally, all the movements involved in boxing revolve around you being able to move your weight from one foot to the other, or your center of gravity from one foot to the other. If you can't do that comfortably and freely, a lot of that just drops away, which is why anytime a boxer takes a kickboxing match on, like at K1, they used to get old washed up boxers to take kickboxing matches, firstly, the lead leg's going to be out there because that's the stance. But secondly, as soon as they eat 2 or 3 low kicks, that's it. That's their chances gone because they're going to be limping. Pennington didn't want to go out for the 5th. They sent her out for the 5th. It's all this. I think once you vocalise it, there should be some kind of punishment for the corner for sending you out. Afterwards, Pennington said they did the right thing, but that's in the aftermath when you're saying okay to your friends, you did the right thing. I grew from getting my ass kicked a little bit more. And of course, after this, there's all she was a warrior. They let her be a warrior. Warrior is the most overused phrase in mixed martial arts fandom, and it basically is just used whenever you want a catch-all excuse for something that is very silly. Why is Diego Sanchez still fighting? Because he's a warrior. Yeah, I mean, not much to say about that. Amanda Nunes continues. That division continues to look meh. I mean, Raquel Pennington hadn't fought in a year and a half or whatever it was. But yeah, a fun enough event, I thought. And then Bellator 199, I only watched 3 of the fights. John Fitch laid all over Paul Daly as expected, so Scott Coker came out afterwards and was like, no, we love Paul. I'd love to work with Paul more. You did just drop him into the hardest possible style matchup after the biggest win of his career because he said he didn't want to fight for you anymore. Class act Scott Coker all over. And what else happened? Czech Congo stopped a guy, which was the big shock of the weekend for me. He did try and lean on the guy. He tried to lean all over him, and then the guy bum rushed him and got caught with the right hand with Congo's back on the fence, just as Cain Velasquez did all those years ago. So embarrassing for Javier Alaya, whatever his name is, Ayala. And then in the main event, King Mo got starched by Ryan Bader on the second punch thrown. And now he says he's going back down to middleweight. The boat has left on King Mo. He's just not as good a fighter as he should be. And all that time spent boxing with the Mayweathers hasn't really helped him, because Ryan Bader is not a great boxer, but he just came out and starched him, and Emmanuel Newton boxed him up, or kickboxed him up. But anyway, that was the week that was. Let's do some questions. Hey Jack, I've been reading your articles for years and have been thoroughly enjoying the podcast. You're easily the second best analyst in the game behind only Brendan Schaub. I'm kidding, of course, but honestly, this is my favourite MMA podcast. Keep up the brilliant work. My question for the show is about the evolution of MMA striking. In the world of boxing, fans say boxers such as Vasily Lomachenko and Terence Crawford are examples of the new breed. So contrastly, who are some strikers in MMA who you believe are ahead of the curve and laying the foundation for the next generation, and why? Thanks. Sincerely, your boy, Scott. Well, the thing is, I'm scouring my mind to find guys who nobody really knows, but the thing that's happening at the forefront right now is guys like Wonderboy and Scoggins using that very side-on stance and using not just... Well, actually, we're going to talk about this extensively next week because we've got Till versus Wonderboy coming up, and Till's a southpaw, and Wonderboy's stances and game are set up in a way where he doesn't do everything from both sides. He does different things from each side. So he uses both stances, but he has very different games on each stance because of the stance matchup that it produces. For instance, he comes out left foot forward, very rarely kicks with his lead leg. He comes out right foot forward, kicks with his lead leg all the time, very rarely kicks with his rear leg. And his orthodox stance is more square and sort of not classical. What we'd be more familiar with, whereas his southpaw stance game is very side-on in sort of like that horse stance. And the same with Scoggins. Darren Cruikshank does a little bit to a degree, but he's really sort of just changes stances however he feels and spins for weird kicks. But I think that idea... Oh, actually, I've got a question about this later, but the idea of using whichever stance for what you feel comfortable, and then, having workable defense on both sides, which is mainly done with footwork, but having workable defense on both sides, and then having a selection of tools from each side that you use, and then not having them the same means that you can spread your training time between a lot of different things rather than trying to do one thing on both sides. A great example of this in jiu-jitsu, I mean, this is a huge Marcelo Garcia theory. If his opponent leads with one leg when they're passing the guard, he does all of his game one way. If they lead with their other leg, he goes with a load of different entries for X-guard and so on. Like, he believes in working different things to different sides so that you have more that you can do and show. If Marcelo Garcia wants to do something weird, he'll switch sides from side control, which is a fairly easy maneuver. You either circle around the top or hop across the middle. But, by doing that, he opens up his favourite technique on that side, which is different to the technique on the first side. So I think that sort of creating variety without having to commit to giving all your time to doing everything on both sides is important. You can effectively use a southpaw stance as an orthodox fighter without having to be perfect at everything you do from an orthodox stance. And I think side-on stuff is really important in that, because the side-on stance, the horse stance, whatever, all those lead leg kicks only really work in MMA when you're open guard. I mean, they work in kickboxing, like, without the low kicks very well, because that's what Bill Superfoot Wallace used to do. But in MMA, they work better when you're open guard, and I think being able to do that is something that we should see more fighters doing in future. Cheers, Scott. Oh, here's that question. Hi Jack, let me begin by sweetening you up and telling you that your podcast is amazing and that I've listened to every one of them. Keep up the good work. Now to the question. I am left-handed, but because of my training in some low-level PKA kickboxing as a teen, I have always fought in orthodox stance. I quit the kickboxing after some time, but still train on the heavy bag and spar with a friend. Anyway, I want to get into full contact kickboxing and eventually MMA. I have been working on my southpaw stance too, but I am undecided on which stance I should master. Do I focus on what I know and develop my jabbery and left hook and have a mean right, or do I forego that? Or do I forego what I know in exchange for the southpaw advantage and work on a right and the southpaw double attack? Cheers in advance from Dave. Yeah, that's a pickle you've got there. By being good at both stances, you've confused yourself. I think one of the things about being left-footed and going left foot forwards, or left-handed left foot forwards, is that the keystone strike against an orthodox fighter, which is most of the fighters you're going to meet, is the left hand and the left foot straight up the centre line, because that's how the stances match up. However, if you want to kick into the open side with power, that's more in the southpaw game. I think one of the things that I would say is get into the kickboxing, use whatever stance you're happy with for the first few training sessions or whatever. When they get you to sparring, try and notice what you're doing when you're having trouble. Like what your body naturally goes back to under duress. You know, when you're being flustered, where are your feet? And then you'll know which stance you are more naturally inclined to go to. And you can use that as your defensive stance, and then anytime you want to switch, you just do it for that moment to set something up and then go back. A nice example is like Jacare, who just got into the UFC based on wins over a combined MMA record of 1-26. What the fuck's going on there? But Jacare, as a kickboxer, he does a lot of tap, tap, tap combinations and changes his feet while he's doing them and then kicks the body, or he'll step back so that he's in a southpaw stance and then kick the body. Just hiding these switches momentarily, and he'll go back to his normal stance afterwards. Another one is like Ryu Narashima, the full contact karateka, or the Kyokushin karateka. He'd like throw his hands to the body and then switch stances into the southpaw stance while he was moving around the opponent to set up his toe kick to the liver. I think as you have the strong left leg, if you're used to fighting orthodox, just go with that for the moment. If you have the strong left leg, work on ways to hide that switch into southpaw stance and then throw the left kick, because if you've got it, it's a killer. And then, of course, if you've been leading with your left hand all these years, and you said you did PKA kickboxing, so you won't have the low kicks down, but you'll probably have a decent jab. So that's a great head start for anything like that. But again, it's experimentation. You really need to just work out what you're doing. And there's nothing to say that over the years you can't develop. You only suggested like 2 or 3 things there, so there's nothing to say that you can't work out a good southpaw double attack, and every time you switch to southpaw, you throw a really hard round kick, and it can be to the head or the body. But I'd work out what you do when you're panicked first. That would be my first thing to do, because that's your natural stance. Right, last one for today. Dear Jack, here's a question in honour of Lomachenko's victory. Oh yeah, I'll have to do something on that in the week. Commentators love to tell us about his 4 years of Ukrainian dance training. What other fighters throughout history swore by unorthodox training disciplines? Many thanks. Lots of love, Lewis. They used to say that Nazim Hamed, he had like 10 years of ballet, and that's where they reckon his amazing leg strength and jumping came from. The inventor of the bolo punch claimed that it was from the action of a machete when you're chopping sugarcane. I can't remember who it was who used to lift hay bales with like a hay hook, and that's how he developed his left hook. Might have been Frazier, might have been Jack Dempsey. Actually, on the subject of stance switches, Marvin Hagler was an interesting guy because he had a lot of power in his right hand, but he fought southpaw most of the time. But when he went to the inside or he got hurt, he went orthodox. So like that was his true stance, I suppose, but he opted to fight southpaw. And he didn't have as much power in his left hand as he did in his right. But Hagler used to do all sorts of bizarre road work. Like he'd run huge portions of his route backwards, and he'd wear army boots the entire time. You hear about other guys doing like lots of spin on spot for 30 repetitions or whatever it is to make yourself dizzy, and then try and shadow box or actually box while discombobulated. There's a few out there. I'll have to think of some and get back to you next week. Cheers, Lewis. Oh, actually, before we leave, Tony Two-Ton Galento used to train by lifting kegs of ale or whatever it was at his bar and slam his fists into brick walls to make them fatter and swollen. But he was just insane, Tony Galento. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for this week. If you haven't checked out the Fight Primer lately, I've tidied it all up. Anything that I do is on there. If you worry you've missed an article or a podcast or whatever, I do 2 articles a week, 2 podcasts a week sometimes. So if you miss one, go there, check it out. Sign up to the Patreon if you want to be a Patreon boy. I think we're probably going to go with Barney Ross for the new episode because I'm enjoying reading about him so much. And your support of the Patreon makes this podcast possible. Pick up Notorious or wait for the revised edition. And send your questions to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Cheers.